Welcome to Mission Santa Inés. This video is intended to show you the great tour of mission history by Bill Warwick, who has dedicated his life for a number of years to the history of the mission, for the preservation of the mission. In his walkthrough, we describe his stories and his detailed knowledge of our great mission. He came to us many years ago with a great deal of education at his bachelor's degree from St. John's and his graduate work at Catholic University in America. He's very quiet about that education, but it brought to him a lot of background in Catholic religion and Catholic education. He'll tell you his purpose of his walkthrough, but we're really pleased to be able to tape this to preserve for history his knowledge of this great mission. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. It is great to have Mike here at the mission with his knowledge of the mission systems throughout California and working with us here in the archives and in the museum. The video that you are about to see is an overview of the history of Mission Santa Inés from 1947 until 1999. It is specifically intended to cover the 1960s through the 1990s, at a time when I worked here at the mission. But it is also intended as a tribute to the Capuchin Franciscan Fathers who have been here at the mission since 1924, with specific tribute to Fathers Cyprian, Tim, Evangelist, Camillus, Roger, Cyril, Jim Cleary, and very briefly, James Johnson and Father Donald. When all the combined projects of these pastors are put together, they are monumental, and I am happy that I was able to be an instrument in their hands. Because of the circumstances of the times, I was not able to keep a diary, so that the dates that we will talk about in this video are general and are actually classified as happening during the time of service of the individual pastors. The historical sources, which have by the way of commentary, are from Father Engelhardt, Mamie Goulet, Kurt Beyer, and Marie Walsh. Even these sources can be found in disagreement. There is also room in my narrative for missayings and even some inaccuracies. But by and large, I've tried to maintain a truthful narration of the events that will follow. In narrating these events, it is not intended to diminish the works of all the other padres who have served the mission. Oddly enough, each one of them played a major part in saving Santa Inés from destruction. 3 of these priests, previous to Father Buckler, deserve special mention because of the special time that they lived here at the mission. An industrious study should be made sometime of their service here at the mission, and their accomplishments should not be forgotten. They are Fathers Forelli, Fathers Lack, and Father Lynch, with a special mention of the Donahue family who served here during their pastorates. Now we will begin as we approach the mission from Mission Drive, Highway 246 in Solvang. We are standing in front of Mission Santa Inés, looking towards the southwest. In the background, you can see the mission buildings, the cemetery wall, and also the walls that separate the mission from the west, which is the town of Solvang. We are now at the entrance to Mission Santa Inés from Highway 246, which goes through the central part of Solvang. The road that you see spread out before you is what was part of the original Mission Road, which came directly from over the Naui grade down through the Alisal, across the Santa Inés River, and then came up the hill and in front of the mission. It was also later on became the old mail road, which brought the mail from Santa Barbara up over the hill and through the Alisal and here to the mission. It was also the common road that was traveled between the missions and Santa Barbara going towards La Purísima in Lampo. The fence that you see on along the edge of the road was installed around 1950. It was a donation by Mr. Walter Duff, who owned the property which is below the mission, owned the property which formed the original olive mill of the mission. He was a very good supporter of the mission, and he thought that along this road we ought to have some kind of fencing, and as a result he donated this rail fence. And he also donated a rail fence which went across where the cemetery wall now is, so that when the time came to put the cemetery wall up, it was necessary to remove the fence. That fence was moved over and now lines the other side of the road, which is an addition dating back to 1980. Because of long-standing problems with visitors here to the mission, quite often missing the mission as they drove by, in 1994, Father Donald decided that it would be better if some kind of a entrance identification was placed here at the entrance to the mission. And so, together with the donations that he received from the Rancheros Visitadores, he established this monument as an attraction and as also a symbol of the place to enter the mission. And jokingly, it is quite often called Father Donald's tombstone. I'm standing here in the northern corner of the mission meadow. From this particular point, we can notice these 3 acres that go to make up the meadow here. The meadow is not an original part of the mission. It was put in here around 1969 by Father Camillus. Originally, Highway 246, which runs right directly in front of me, had no curbs, no gutters. It was just a state highway with very little improvement. And as a result, as time went by, this empty field, after it was plowed each year, became a dumping ground for a lot of people in the community. And as a result, Father thought the time had come to make the front of the mission much more attractive. And as a result, he had this meadow planted together with a sprinkler system that irrigated it. He also found it would be necessary to keep the people from still driving in here on the meadow with their cars, and so about 99 junipers were planted along the edge of the highway, and in order to make a break. Later on, when the Highway 246 was improved, the curbs and gutters and a brick sidewalk was installed to make a good separation between the mission and the state highway. I might note in just passing that the brick walkway was a donation by Phil Condit. He was a part of the city council at that time, and he wanted to have all the sidewalks in Solvang laid in brick. The council would not give him approval, but he did, out of his own pocket, pay for the laying of the brick sidewalk along the front of the mission. Looking towards the west, which is in this direction here, you will see a block wall. That block wall existed up to about 1968. The mission property extended through where the present bank is now and over to where the gas station used to be, and is now a piece of property that's going to be developed. But the Archdiocese sold the property to the Security Bank people, and they built their bank. And part of the deal was to create a wall separating the mission property from the bank parking lot. Early on, that wall was much more simple than it is now. It primarily consisted of a grape stake fence, which ran about 300 feet from this direction here right up to where the trees and the little archway exist. The wall itself was put in 1974 when the Archdiocese came to do the revamping and the reconstruction of many parts of the mission, and part of that was to take down the grape stake fence and to replace it with a block wall. If we follow more across the field, we will look at and find a wall that has a tile cap on it. That is the cemetery wall. It is a model of the original cemetery wall, which was built by the Chumash Indians beginning in 1804 when this mission was established. Later on, we will be able to take a look at the cemetery, a little closer look at the wall from the inside. But this wall was built probably around the time of Father Cyril's pastorate here, was paid for by the men's club, and was based and built on the original adobe wall, which was there from mission times. Now, if you will look towards the mission and the bell tower in the meadow part directly in front of me, you will notice a very sharp rise in the ground. This is are the remnants and the ruins, or what we call the meltdown, from the old soldier garrison which was established here at the mission. There were at least 4 Spanish or Mexican soldiers attached to the mission at its building, and they lived and quartered and had their garrison in this very high spot here in the mission. This is a very sensitive piece of ground and has been excavated a number of times. About 10 years ago by Dr. Robert Hoover, representing Cal Poly, and a very significant amount of information was found and is now stored in the mission archives and also at the university. Later on, this same area, which we call the garrison, when the mission was abandoned, ironically became living quarters temporarily for a family that lived here at the mission, and later on became a grocery store, which came to be known as the Amat store. Behind the garrison and looking more towards this end of the cemetery, there were the stalls and the blacksmith shops and all the things that had to do with the horses and shoeing and this type of thing. And as a result, when one digs in that area, on the lower piece down here, quite often we will find pieces of horseshoes, nails, and this type of thing that have to do with the shoeing and horses. If you will look at the cemetery wall, you will notice a couple of places where the level of the tile level changes and steps down. Well, looking across this wall, we'll have a better look at this later on when we go in the cemetery. The first 2 drops off have to do just with leveling, but from the second drop off and all the way to meeting the wall at the far end is an area that is outside the original Chumash cemetery, and the levels of ground are different in that particular area. Also, you will notice that the far end between the cemetery wall and the old bank wall, there is an arch. That arch was put in as part of an agreement between the city of Solvang and the Old Mission at the time when the city condemned what is now parking lot number 1 for a parking lot for the city, and part of the remuneration of that was that they were to build an arch so that people would have a walk-through or availability to the mission, because otherwise the walls would have the combination of the 2 walls would have blocked off foot access to the mission. In 1979, because of the fiesta was in such a nature that it was growing rather rapidly and there was a need for electrical power, the men's club also installed a set of electrical boxes all along here to supply the various booths. These electrical boxes were updated in about 1995 and serve the fiesta at the present time. If you will notice that I'm standing on a green slab or faded green slab of concrete here in the middle of the Mission Meadow. This slab was poured in 1975 by the men's club after the first fiesta. At the first fiesta, we did not have a stage. We had to use the bed of a truck in order to do our entertainment, and that was not sufficient. So the second year, the men's club paid for and actually poured this concrete slab with the idea that it would be a permanent stage for the fiesta, which would be conducted here in August of every year. And it was kept in this way here until probably around 1988, at which time we were able to acquire a very large stage, which quite often we just set up above this concrete slab. If you will now look towards the north, looking out towards Highway 246, you will see the entrance to the mission, the road leading down. As we look along this area, we will see some very old and very large pepper trees. Those pepper trees date to about no further back than 1928. They were planted by one of the Capuchin brothers who was stationed here when the Capuchins took over the mission in 1924. We are told that this was a very difficult assignment in those days. The mission was very without very many facilities, and the brother found it very difficult to live here, and in order to occupy his time, he decided to align this old section of road, which was actually the early Camino Real, which ran directly in front of the mission. He decided to line this road with a line of pepper trees on either side of the road. The reason pepper trees were taken because it is said by a tradition that Father Serra brought up from South America pepper trees and had them planted at the various missions. And to this day, you will probably find that most missions have numerous pepper trees on them. So it was done according to the feeling that this was the desire of Father Ynez Serra. We are also told, but we have no early photographs, we are also told that both sides of the road he lined with petunias, and that the entrance to the mission between 1926 and 1930 was quite attractive. I'm standing here by the wall that divides the Mission Meadow from the bank property, which is on my right. The reason we are zeroing in on this area here is because it is important to note that pretty much directly on the valve that you can see down in this far area here, there's a water meter, a city water meter on the outside on the city right-of-way. And from that city meter, there is a large control device. And after that, two major water lines that supply the mission with city water originate. It is important to note that buried pretty much under exactly where I'm walking now, there are two 4-inch water supply lines. One, which is for irrigation water here at the mission, and the other is for domestic water. At the present time, in 2006, the irrigation line has been separated from city water, and water is being supplied by a mission well. However, those lines are still charged, and if there was any digging in this area, it'd be very important that about 4 foot down, these two major water lines are running. As I approach the wall of the cemetery, at an area about 2 to 3 feet this side of the cemetery wall. The irrigation line has a T in it, and at that T there is also a small valve which over the years somehow has gotten buried. But what is important is that running the full length of this cemetery wall, there is a 2-inch supply line which brings water to the front of the mission. We are now standing at the far end, or the east end of the mission property along the barranco. And it was through this large field, which is more or less in the shape of a triangle, that the main water line from the Alamo Pintado Creek supplied the reservoir. The reservoir can be found pretty much on a straight line towards the clump of trees at the end of this field. We'll take a look at that in a few moments. But the water line was brought up from Alamo Pintado Creek from a dam that was built down there by the Chumash in about 1810. Stored water, and then it was flumed up to this part of the ground and filled the reservoir and the lavanderia, which were the water supplies for the mission. Somewhere along the line of this little footpath is most likely where that line is buried. We have been able to track it by tracking devices, but we have not taken the steps that are necessary to dig it up and confirm that. If you'll now turn and look more or less towards the open field below and over the barranco, you will see the lower mission fields and also a portion of the ground which belongs to the Santa Barbara Trust for Historic Preservation. As we move down forward here in a few moments, we'll also look out across this field and see the location of the Grist Mill, which was built in 1820, a fulling mill also for the mission. And it is the first industrial site in the state of California and has great significance, and is now owned and operated by the Santa Barbara Trust for Historic Preservation. In the near future, this property is now available to become a state park, and we are looking forward to joining forces with the Santa Barbara Trust for Historic Preservation to create an interpretive park in this area, which would be open for horse trails and hiking, but no vehicular traffic. Also is planned for there a certain area to be put in orchards, which would restore some of the original integrity of the mission. Looking forward straight out into the field, one can see 2 great big green water tanks. Those tanks are located over the mission well. They were established there in 1996. The well was dug, and water line was brought across the field, up here onto the barranco atop, and across to the far northern western part of the mission, and there it tapped into the irrigation lines. So the mission is supplied by 2 water systems. One, the water that comes from this pump, which is not potable water, but which is used for irrigation, and the water line which is tapped into from the city, which supplies drinking water for the mission itself. Looking back to the area from which we came, you might draw attention to the fact that over in this area towards which I'm walking is where the annual Christmas tree burn takes place by the fire department here in the city of Solvang. This is an annual event, and it gathers a great number of people every year. It has been done here since the mid-1980s. It might be also interesting to note that this field also at one time, probably around the the late 1950s, when Father Kelly was the pastor here, it was sincerely considered that this field might be the site on which a regular parish church could be built, and the mission and mission churches would remain as a historical tourist attraction, and the parish would have its own church. but due to financial and other complications, it was found that this would not be feasible. Behind me, and overlooking the barranco out over the area towards the mountains and down on the field below, is in 2006, the first fireworks display took place here at the mission. The fireworks were shot off from the field below, and the spectators filled the upper part here. It turned into be a highly successful event, and it appears that this will be a regular event here at the mission also. As we come out of the field, we now are approaching the reservoir, and as we go to the reservoir, we will pass the front of the mission church. Immediately, you will see the continuation of the cemetery wall with the arch and the gate to the cemetery. And also to the left of it is the bell tower and the face of the church, and directly beyond that is what is called the convento of the mission. As we move further to the left, we will now come to the reservoir, which is the source, or rather the result of where the pipeline would end, which came from the Alamo Pintado Creek. At the present, we are looking at a new section of the mission, which was established with a major restoration in 1974. It includes a new driveway. We now have an in driveway, which is the old Camino Real, and an out driveway, which allows the cars to exit. At the end of this exit driveway is a large parking lot, which proceeds in a semicircle around the reservoir. This area was added also in 1974 at that restoration time in order to increase the parking that was necessary for here at the mission because of the added tourism and added numbers of people visiting the mission, buses and etc. This area up until that time was actually field, and it was in this area that each year when the rancheros came, they gathered in this field here along a fence which ran parallel to the row of bushes that now occupy the far end of the parking lot. So this area from the pillars at the far end down there to the present area was bordered by a rail fence, and it was inside this area that the rancheros got their annual blessing before, or early on after their ride, and then later before their ride each year, beginning in May. Okay, you're now looking at the inside of the mission reservoir. You will notice that there are different configurations within this reservoir. At the far end, there seems to be a deep pit. Now, the reason for that pit was when the water was brought through the pipeline here to the mission, it flowed in directly into this large pit from a spot near the top of the reservoir. And the reservoir was filled, and then the water was allowed to settle. And being that the pit was the lowest spot, the silt and impurities in the water settled in that area, and the water was thereby much more clean than it came in from the creek. The water then exited here through a pipeline approximately in the area where I am standing right now, and went directly south this way to the Indian village and the Lavendaria, which we will take a good look at a little bit later. But for the present time, this is the mission reservoir. It was filled with water. It was from here that the water for the mission was stored for the seasons when there was no rain. There are two drains from this reservoir. One is in the bottom of the settling tank, and that took the water out through a pipeline which was directly out over the hill, and it ran it down into the orchards which were in the lower field. Looking at this end of the reservoir, which is the west end, the shallow end of the reservoir, you will notice right near the tile base there are two drain holes. They are not part of the original reservoir as we can determine, but we do know that in 1910 there was a tremendous rain here at the mission, and a lot of damage was done to the mission itself. And when the mission was rebuilt by Father Buckler, the damaged bell tower, etc., he had the wisdom to install rain gutters on the mission itself. And at that time, as far as we can trace, those rain gutters, two of them draining the front of the church, drained into the reservoir, and that way kept a massive amount of water away from the adobe buildings. That seems to be the logical explanation for it. I do recall early on, when I first came to the mission in the 50s, that those rain gutters were still installed and that they still drained water here into the reservoir.
Mission Santa Inés is unique among the California missions. It's one of the few missions that has a status as a National Historic District. This monument reflects the National Historic Landmark for the church itself, but the district extends beyond the boundaries of the church facilities. It includes the oldest industrial building in California, the wool-fulling mill, which is located across the valley from the mission. It includes the original Indian residential facility that was located adjacent to the mission, and includes the agricultural fields located below the mission. So it's quite an extensive district. The other missions have historical status, but few have the National Historic District status. When Bill described the inside of the main reservoir in front of the church, he noted that the one pipe extended into the fields for watering the fields. You can see on the slope below me, if you can pan the camera, right below us is the exit to that pipe. This is the source of watering the fields below from the main reservoir. It's the only area left from the aqueduct system for watering the fields that we can see today. Fields below, which had its groves, its fruit trees. The olive trees were located directly in front of me on the side of the mountain, on top of the mountain. The only water source for this irrigation on the lower level was from this source. And yet when the pirate was captured along the coast and wanted out of jail, he proposed building the first industrial building in California, the wool-fulling mill. And he built it on the other side of the creek, clear over to the eucalyptus trees, clear on the other side of the valley. And that mill is served by a part-time, part-seasonal ditch, Sanakota ditch. But he built an English-style mill. That's a mill where it has water running over the top of it at all times. To this date, the mill that was over there, the grist mill, was a Spanish-style mill which ran flat and did not need a full-time source of water. The big issue to the students at Santa Inés High School was, how did they get the water from this location, the aqueduct here, over to the wool-fulling mill? Or was the wool-fulling mill only built for the pirate to get out of jail, and he never intended it to be built, never intended it to be used? This is the detective story the students were given. How did the water get from here over to there? It was a challenge for them because they had to understand the total water system of the mission. They had to understand the hydraulics of that water system. They had to understand how it worked. They had to understand how the water system, the mills worked. They had to understand what was here at the time when the mission existed. They had to understand where the agriculture was, where the olive press was over here. They needed to know the full layout. They needed to know what the topography was of this valley. Before the developers came in, they went back to old topo maps. Before the roads over on this side of the valley were actually changed, the topo of the valley. This was the challenge by the students at Santa Inés High School. And they took it on as a real challenge, their detective story. Students at Santa Inés High School did an extensive research project regarding the water system of Mission Santa Inés. Their study included all of the territory behind me to the source, to the dam of Mission Santa Inés. The water system came out, again, as Bill described, below us right here. And the aqueduct that they studied went from this reservoir north up through the parking lot area and up to the white mission-style building immediately behind me and through the vacant field. Parts of the mission aqueduct are still visible today, and parts were uncovered by the students themselves in their study. The aqueduct from this point here back to the dam is fairly level, which means the aqueduct was pressurized, and the students theorized that that aqueduct was pressurized by a high dam that would have water sufficient in height to provide the pressure to maintain the aqueduct supply line to this reservoir. Surprising, most of the aqueduct, about at least 65% of the mission aqueduct, still exists within the community of Solvang. It has not been destroyed. One location you can see it is at this location right here. Most people do not realize it's even the mission aqueduct. Let me take a second and go up there. Here's a part of the aqueduct that's just rolled down the mountain. You can tell it because it's got Spanish cement on it. It's broken off. A little cleaning here. You can see the original aqueduct. This rock has fallen. You can see the size of it. The square aqueduct, the plastering on each side. It was covered completely. The aqueduct was again fairly level. It went from here to the mission. From here behind us, it went to the dam along Alamo Pintado Creek. The only way again it could be level was to have a pressurized dam to send the system here. Behind us, in this direction, was a silting operation where the water came into a cistern and the sand, the gravel would fall into a pit. That was quite a ways back, maybe 2 blocks from where we're at right now. But this is the remnants. A roadway about 20 feet wide took out this section. The rest of the aqueduct from here to the mission is preserved, and a substantial portion, probably 3/4 of a mile this way, is preserved, except in one subdivision has been removed. But the rest of it's been preserved this way, clear to Alamo Pintado Road. We really need to record the exact location of the aqueduct so that as development occurs, the pressure for development occurs. We don't have new development tearing out the aqueduct. Unfortunately, in the one track that did go through the aqueduct, the solution was to remove the rocks and to number them so that the aqueduct could be reconstructed somewhere else. And It was never reconstructed. The rocks were left there with the numbers on them. The painting is now disappeared or barely seen on the rocks because no one could afford to reconstruct the aqueduct. And the road could have been lifted about 2 feet over the aqueduct, and the aqueduct could have been preserved in its original location. So there's a lot that can be done within the city to preserve this aqueduct for the future generations to see and to maintain. Again, built 1804, probably 1807. It can be seen quite a ways around. Thank you. This area on the other side of the road cut, you can also see just a small outcropping of the aqueduct on the top. You'll notice the Spanish cement, the round rocks. I'm not going to expose it because I want to leave it covered up so the public cannot see it right now. It's the only way you can protect the old Spanish aqueduct is to really keep it protected. But if you look, you can see the Spanish cement. If you dug down right there, you'd be finding the same square aqueduct, which would connect across to the road. From here, again, it goes down through this property, goes across underneath the highway, and goes clear across to Alamo Pintado Creek. It actually goes through the property where the mission road is, and it goes across where the hospital is. The hospital graded and removed most of it through the hospital site. But if you go across the hospital, you'll find round rocks with Spanish cement on it that were graded out and put along the side of the road. So you can actually see the parcels of the old aqueduct by the Santa Inés Valley Cottage Hospital.
Along this fence line and on the outside are a series of rainbirds and sprinklers, which are there to water the trees and also to help keep the lower hillside green. And also along the edge of the parking lot to the right, there is also a set of sprinklers, mostly drip lines that water the shrubs and plants that are in that particular area. This is mentioned specifically so that the source of that water might be identified. This water is supplied from an area down by the Lavanderia. In order to check these lines out, the line goes down to the Lavanderia from the entrance to the Stations of the Cross, and then doesn't terminate there, but goes to the right and surrounds the convent and comes back to the front field in front of the mission. It's just worthy to note that the water source here is the important thing. To control that water along these edges, we need to control the water at the main valve at the highway. I'm standing at the present time where the old Camino Real entered into the front of the mission. This road, as you look towards the south, would have proceeded through this area of the Stations of the Cross and would have gone down and around, down below in this direction and come out and cross the river coming down out of the Alisal and out of Nahui. The Stations of the Cross that you see here are not part of the original mission Stations of the Cross, but they were built around 1994 by Al Cito in memory of the Cito and Padilla family, and it has been a positive addition to the mission itself, together with the addition of some trees and some other shrubbery. I'm now going to move over to my left, and as I do in this direction here, we will be heading towards the area that, which would be the last two arches of the original mission quadrangle. And from there, where we will come down and come near to a large wooden cross, which will mark the site of the second mission church, which was built as a temporary church during the rebuilding of the new church at the mission because of the earthquake in 1812. I'm standing on what would be the southeast corner of the original mission quadrangle, and these last two arches have not been replaced. I am standing over the ruins of those arches and also over the floors. The Mission Rose Garden was planted here in 1996, but it is over and planted over the remains of the last corner of the mission itself. Now, as we move around and looking east from where I am at this present time, we will see where the temporary church was located in relationship to the corner of the Old Mission quadrangle. The temporary church extended from approximately where I am at the present time and moved almost due south towards the area that's marked by a mound and a large wooden cross. This church was built in 1812 as a temporary building in order so that the Padres could rebuild the church that had collapsed during the earthquake. It was built close to the Indian village, which is just beyond it, and the Padres knew that this would not be a permanent building, and so it was not really built in the form of a church, but in the form of a large building. And when the new church was built, the mission church was built and rededicated on September 17th, in September in 1817, this building was then converted to a granary and used to store grain and this type of thing as a storeroom for the mission. As I walk over towards the far end of the present school here at the mission, I would like to note that this building is built most likely upon the ruins of the first row of apartments, which were living quarters for the mission Indians. Actually, from this point on and south, there were 5 different rows, 200 feet long, of apartments that housed the neophytes here at the mission. And these ruins decayed after the 1850, after the Padres left the mission. But we do find the ruins by looking out across the field, which we will do a little bit later. We can see the mounds which contain the meltdown or the ruins of the mission village. As I walk down this area, I would like also to note what I mentioned before is, because I feel it's important, the source of the water that feeds the barranco and the planting area, that comes up along this walk here from the lavanderia, crosses over at this place and goes directly over to the entrance to the Stations of the Cross. As I walk along this path, if you will please note that there are in certain areas little raises in the soil. For example, right here, and as you go down a little bit further, you will see another rise, and beyond that is another rise. Those are the meltdown or the ruins of the early mission village. There were about 200 apartments in all on each one of these rows, 5 different rows. They had stone foundations, adobe walls, and tile roofs. They housed anywhere from 250 to 300 families that were members of the mission. The young people, the young girls and the young boys had different quarters up in the mission buildings themselves. So the small children, the mother and father, actually lived in these buildings. As I walk down on this asphalt path, this path was constructed and built by the Men's Club in 1976 as a opening up of the area of the lavanderia. At that time, the lavanderia was totally buried in dirt and rocks, and over the course of 1 year, by almost all handwork, about 20 of us actually emptied out the lavanderia, cleaned it up, and got a full view of what it originally looked like. We're now going to move down towards that lavanderia so that we'll give you an explanation of how the lavanderia worked and what use it was put to. We now arrived at the area of the lavanderia. If you will look at it, it's a long, narrow pool. At one end, there's a large rise in the construction, and inside that is, perhaps we can get a better look at later, there was a large tank, which was the area that the water flowed in, and from that, the neophytes came to get their drinking water. The overflow from that water fell into the big tank, and the people, the neophytes from the Indian village, would come down here and wash their clothes. Later on, we can get a good look from the far end of how that process took place. At the present time, you are looking at the a water system that dropped the water from the drinking water section, dropped it into the main tank, and it was in this tank that the washing of the Indians did their washing of their clothes. Taking a close look at the sides of the lavandaria, it's a little bit difficult to understand how this was done, but basically what one has to do is to picture a kind of a gradual rise here, which looked like it was going to form a circle over the top of the building, and that went out to the flat edge. And what the neophytes would do, they would come along and sit on this area here, and dip their clothes into and scrub them along the flat area down there. So this was shaped, and we'll see this in a little bit, so that the water, dirty water, instead of running back into the reservoir, came back to a little trough, which carried it to the far end of the reservoir and emptied out into the field. As you look into the reservoir from the far end, you will already notice what we have talked about before, the supply system for water into this lavandaria. Looking a little bit to the right, you will see the slanted wall, which, as it were, made the boundaries of the lavandaria. You will also see the flat area on which the neophytes beat their clothes, and you will also see the little trough whereby the dirty water ran back into this trough and out to an exit at this far end and drained out into the field. The water in the tank, when it become unsettled or too dirty to use, was emptied out of this reservoir by a drain at the very bottom here in the left-hand corner of the reservoir. That pipeline we have tracked out somewhat into the field, and from there we surmise that it ran out across the edge of the hill and drained down into the orchard, much like the other reservoir at the other end of the mission. Looking to your left, there is a wall, you will notice. That is one of the walls of the Indian village that we were able to reconstruct. We found the foundations intact. We had some adobe block. We placed them on top of the foundations and were able to, in a small way, recreate at least one corner of the buildings that formed the Indian village.
During the mission era, this was the village, the apartments for the mission Indians. But we're standing right next to the mission village, which is part of the National Historic District. On my right, you will see the area where the Chumash had their original Indian village. It extended from this area down through the vacant land behind the trees. That's known within the city area as Lot 72, was protected within a specific plan for the purposes of protecting the original Chumash village. You'll notice there is a road there now, and that road has been elevated above the Chumash village site. The fence line, the power lines, and all that are artificially created along a property line that didn't exist back in the Chumash days. But the village area is here below us to my right. The relocated Indian village site is right here to my left. We're right at the dividing line between the old Indian village, Chumash village, and the new village line. The area is interesting because when the Mexican government, newly created, secularized the mission and moved the Indians out of this area, they moved completely over across the valley to the land that was given to them on the College Ranch by the Catholic Church, later created into a reservation, which is along the Santa Inés Creek. We're standing on top of a mound area, which was the Indian Chumash apartments. You'll notice another example of a destruction of the footings for the apartments here, where this box for water and sprinkler controls could have been placed about 10 feet in front of me and not have destroyed the footings or foundations for the surface. You can tell the footings and foundations because of the large-scale rocks are not native to this particular area. The box was selected here on the high ground when it could have been selected over there, put over there, and the footing's been preserved in its natural form. Someone didn't notice, didn't care that it was the top of the mound. It was a structure here, and went ahead and put it in and destroyed a portion of the mission history.
Throughout this walk through the mission property, I've been pointing out the water source for the upper part of the mission on the east side. At this particular point, you will see a stub out of the ground. Now that is at a corner point of the water system. From here, it turns and goes in this direction here. It comes from this direction over here, and it's all in a 2-inch line, which will go about 100 feet beyond the garage of the convent, and then turn and go directly north over to the present youth center, and from there on out to the highway. There is no shutoff for this water between the highway and this particular point. I am now walking along what would have been the original entrance to the mission, or the Camino Real, which would take me down through the valley here and over the hill down into the Santa Inés River. And the highway across the Santa Inés River came out through the Alisal and went up over the hill and came out on the Nahui grade. As it went by the creek or the river, the Santa Inés River, which we will not be able to show you, there was at that particular place the tanning vats for the mission that all the leather goods and this type material were processed down there along the river. If one wants to view the tanning vats, they would be approximately near the clubhouse, just below the clubhouse at the River Course Golf Course. As we look to the east, you will see, as has been described before, the raised road, which is between the mission and Lot 72. But you will also notice, and you will have noticed through this entire tour of the mission, the tremendous number of pepper trees that are spread about the mission. Every one of these pepper trees I personally have planted here at the mission over the last 40 years. They were done at the direction of Father Camillus. He felt in 1969 that it was necessary to outline the mission property and also to bring it in conformity with the trend of missions to have pepper trees. And so we began at that time, and over the next 20 years, we were able to plant all the pepper trees that you will see outlining the mission property. As we return to the mission, we are going to go up to the 19th arch, and Mike will be able to give you a short description of that original piece of the mission buildings.
There's 3 concepts in mission preservation. One is to prevent destruction. I think Bill talked about it pretty well, that when the parish hall was built, it was built on top of the original footings and floors, and it was documented, so none of the original facilities was destroyed. The second element of mission preservation is to provide for the protection and preservation of the facilities. You'll see on this arch where there was early attempts at preservation. It won't stand alone, so there was an early effort to provide for its freestanding position by the addition of rocks as a secondary support. So this is a preservation. When they built the hall, they did not enclose that within the building. They actually held back the building for this distance. The third element within preservations is called the historical presentation. What you do in your new facilities, or what you do around the facilities, is to present yourself in a nature or manner that provides for the historical era or the historical feeling, so you don't inject a modern feeling within a historical facility. And we've done that in some areas around here by putting in a modern light, where in the old facilities they did not have modern lights, and in the reconstruction of the hall you'll notice the antique lights. In this facility, right next to the antique preserved arch, it's a modern phone, the wrong location for the modern phone. Historical picture for those that are touring the mission, when you have the modern phone again right behind it. This phone could have been located 20 feet behind on the other walkway and avoided the conflict between the modern and the old. The reason you keep this arch for the public in its original format is it shows the style of how the bricks were baked. It shows the original plaster and how it was constructed and applied. It shows the original color for the arches. You can see the original pinkish red color from cinnabar that was mixed with the plaster. And it shows the early preservation effort to keep the arch from falling. Now, under new standards, and several missions have added earthquake preservation methods that would provide additional support for facilities such as this. This has not been done here, although the main structure has had earthquake preservation methods applied. And Bill Warwick will describe those later.
As we come back up from the Indian village in the Lavendaria to the end of the school, which lays on the first row of homes in the Indian village, we notice that there is a shrine honoring Our Lady of Guadalupe. This shrine dates back to approximately 1980 and was built and paid for by the Guadalupano Club, working together with Solomon and Elvira Rojas and Sister Diane of the Sisters of the Sacred Heart. The statuary that is here was actually made in Madrid, Spain, and was shipped over here in pieces. A close look at the shrine will notice, you can notice the various parts as they were assembled and put together for this beautiful shrine. It has been cared for ever since then by Solomon Rojas and is a tribute to the Hispanic community here at Mission Santa Inés. Again, we are standing at the southeast corner of the convento and the mission quadrangle. And as we look towards the east, we will see the facing part of the school, the mission school, and the mission convent. The mission school and convent were built in around 1955 and were housed at that time by the catechetical sisters from Huntington, Indiana. The construction of the convent and the school up to the first arch was built by Father Tim under his guidance, and it was at that time our CCD program became very much organized. Before that, catechism classes were taught in Santa Inés and in the various homes of parishioners. When the convent was built and the school, we now had the opportunity to give catechetical lessons to the children of the parish. Looking at the school itself and looking to the left, you can see the arch and then another set of 2 classrooms, actually 4 classrooms, which were added at a later date as our catechetical program progressed. They were done under the direction of Father Evangelist Kelly, and since that time the school has become a very much used building, being used almost every single day, either for catechetical instructions, for Head Start program, for different groups in the evenings, such as the Alcoholics Anonymous and other catechetical uses for adults. As I move to the west, I am walking along the meltdown from this east side of the Mission Quadrangle. Somewhere in this area where I'm standing right now, there was the main entrance into the quadrangle, was like, as it were, a service entrance into the shop area, etc. As I walk down further, we will notice an extremely high spot, and that is the complete meltdown of the west wall of the quadrangle itself. We presume that in this area, most likely because of the high degree of melt, that perhaps there was a winery, the local mission winery was located in this area, and also the soap vats were also located in this area. The rest of the area, as we look over towards this direction here, was the basic shop area. It was in here that carpentry work was done. The making of bricks and tiles was also done in this portion of the quadrangle. And in fact, at different times when we have worked in this area, especially when the new buildings were built, new electrical lines and cable television lines were brought into the mission. And as we excavated along the line of the oleanders, we found mission floor tiles laid and in perfect shape, as if they were in the days when they were exposed to the open area. So it was quite interesting, and that is also noted in the archaeological study at the University of Santa Barbara. We are now down on the front area, or not the front area, but the side area of the convent here at the Old Mission. And I want to talk a little bit about the background for the convent, and a little bit later the school. When Father Tim arrived in the early 1950s, the children in the parish were receiving religious education under what was called the release time program, in which the children were released from school early on a Thursday, and they went to various homes where the CCD teachers instructed them. However, this program was under controversy by the state, and also the size of the groups began to grow, and the number of teachers went in reverse, became short. And so Father Tim decided that it was a time to try and open up a catechetical school here at Old Mission Santa Inés. The first thing he had to do was to locate an order of nuns who would be willing to teach in his school, and also be able to keep them occupied completely. So he was able to obtain an order of sisters called the Catechetical Sisters from Huntington, Indiana. 3 sisters came here in the early 50s and lived in cottages, a cottage on Alisal Road, I believe. At that time then, Father Tim received approval to build a school and a convent. Well, of course, the first thing that had to be built was a convent, and that is what we're looking at the present time. As we look to the right on the lower building section, which is actually the convent part of the structure, and moving to the left where the roof rises and the windows become larger, is there a chapel. They have a very beautiful chapel inside the convent, and in front of that is some parlor receiving rooms, but the main part of that building is the chapel. The sisters came here and they lived in this convent for a number of years until the 70s, at which time the vocation shortage began to bother them, and they were unable to keep this mission staffed. Part of the work that they did while they were here was not only to teach catechism here to the children of Santa Inés, but they also had a contract with Santa Maria. They had a contract with the parish in Lompoc, and a number of other parishes in this rural area to also teach catechism. And consequently, they really were not able, as the vocation shortage dropped off, they were not able to to staff the mission. And as a result, Cardinal McIntyre recommended that we bring the Sisters of the Sacred Heart, who had just arrived here from Canada, arrived here actually from Hungary via Canada, where they had moved into this country from Hungary after the persecutions in Hungary by the communist government. And so as the sisters of the instructional sisters moved out, the catechal sisters dedicated to the Sacred Heart moved in and took over the convent. They too accepted the same contracts that were binding on the other sisters, and consequently the three sisters that were established here had a full-time job in staffing the catechetical portion of the mission life. At the same time this group was teaching catechism here, the number of CCD teachers also had to be maintained, because there was a large segment of children who came from this reservation, a large segment of children who lived in Santa Inés and could not make it in here to the mission school. And as a result, a small chapel was bought in Santa Inés, and catechetical instructions were given there once a week, mostly under the guidance of Palmyra Murphy and Georgia Morgan and Helen Gonzalez. And they conducted that work until the late 70s, at which time, with transportation being bettered and a commute program for the children was established, it was able to sell that church in Santa Inés and all the children to come in here for instruction. So the part we're looking at now is the part that the sisters live in, and we're going to move towards the front of the convent and then to give a little bit of background to the mission school. I'm standing here at the front door to the mission convent right now, and as you see, it does follow the theme of the mission buildings, the archways, etc., and the doors do follow the pattern of mission architecture. However, because of the cost of the school, one thing that was not able to be done was to put a proper roof on the convent and the school. And it wasn't until almost 1985 that we were able to afford to put a different type roof. The roof that was on the church, on the convent and the school, was what was called aerox. That is a red, very soft rock on tar paper. And as a result, that type of roof does not have much durability, and we had a constant problem of leaks in the convent, of leaks in the school. However, when Father Jim came here to the mission, and we were able to go and to put the tile roofs that make up the mission, make up the school and the convent, and consequently has brought them much more in line with the mission architecture and the feel of the mission. This building, as we said before, including the school around here, is located on the ruins of the first row of Indian village here at the mission. The first part of the mission school ended at this spot here. It was a very flat wall, went to the back to the back portion of the school, and in the very late 1950s, under the pastorate of Father Evangelist Kelly, it being necessary to increase the size of the school, another 2 full-size classrooms were added. Although in these classrooms there was not a portable wall, each room has two as a permanent divider, and the entrance to one room being on this side, the entrance to this room, the other room, being on the other side. It is here that our catechetical instructions take place during the week under the CCD program and under the guidance of the Sisters of the Sacred Heart. The far classroom also has another use, which is an everyday use, which is by the Head Start program, and the program is conducted here all during the school year for the poor children of the area, and has been in here for probably almost 20 years now. So this is what the schools are. We're going to take a very brief look at the playground, which was established for the Head Start program, and at the back of the convent, and school, and that will take care of the areas of the school and the mission school that we've been talking about. We're now looking at briefly at the backside of the school. As you look towards the buildings themselves, you can actually see more evenly the construction of the second portion of the building. On the backside it is much higher. It's a different type of construction. You can see the first part, the first school, and then looking further to beyond that into the west, you can see also the backside of the convent with a small lawn and planters in that particular area. I want to draw your attention specifically to something that might be of importance later on. When someone sees this cut along the side of the building here, that saw cut was put there on purpose after it was discovered that in the heavy storms of rain that drove in from this way, these buildings were totally exposed to the driving rains. And what had happened when they built the school, they did not put what is called a weep board between the lath and plaster and the concrete slab and foundation. And as a result, when they stuccoed the building, they stuccoed it up right from the bottom right up into the lath and plaster. Well, as you may know, plaster is very absorbent, and water, even though it is protective, it also absorbs a great deal of moisture. And what was happening, especially on this corner and this corner over here, that the water was going in, hitting the tar paper, which formed the part of the lath and plaster, and it was running down that tar paper. Well, it had no way to escape. Once it was trapped in there, the only easiest way out was not to the outside, because this was all sealed, but it was to the inside. And consequently, after a large storm, we could have anywhere from a half an inch to 3/4 inch of water in this end classroom. And after some efforts, I went over to the mill and lumber, and a gentleman I knew over there, one of the owners, Abel Skit, I asked him if he could come over and tell us what we could do. Well, he wasn't even here 5 minutes. He knew exactly what was done. And he said, well, the only thing that we can do now is to put a saw cut along the bottom strip of the building, and that will allow the water, as it comes down the wall, instead of to go into the building, would force it to come out to the outside. And the first storm that happened after this job was done, we never had another drop of water in that classroom. So it was the right solution, and it was, in fact, Evil came over and did the job himself, and he didn't charge us for it.